What is it called when a group of network engineers goes to lunch together? An outage. Haha. I don't have any more corny networking jokes for you in this video, but I do have a quick peek into how cool network automation can be. Now, disclaimer, tried to make this video last night and my idea was it's going to be a quick, 2 to 7 minute video because the example is super simple and I'm just going to show you how to get into it and all of this stuff. But then when I started explaining it, I realized it was taking me a little bit longer. So fair warning, this video is probably going to end up to be around 20 minutes long. Turn the speed up, do whatever you got to do. I'll try to come back and add key points timed out in the description. But basically, I want to show other beginners how a beginner such as myself accomplished something with network programmability and one of the Cisco APIs and how I got to that point so that others can, use the resources I use to do so and basically, dispel some fears because most of the questions I've got from colleagues, subscribers, or seen elsewhere about the Encore and the other new certs coming out and just the industry in general is about automation and programmability. Do I have to learn Python? Things like that. Also wireless, but this video isn't about that. The point of this video is to introduce network programmability with an extremely basic example. We'll configure a Nexus 9K to start an OSPF process. We'll give it a router ID. We'll set an interface to be a layer 3 interface, assign that interface an IP address, and enable OSPF on that interface, all with a Python script. Super cool. Now, for all of you and myself who are studying for the enterprise certs, why would I do this on a Nexus? Well, Nexus has a handy feature with the NX-API called the NX-API Sandbox. Intro is getting long, so I'll show you more about the sandbox and how I use it later in the video. Long story short, it was a little bit easier for me to get started and accomplish something on the Nexus because of the NX-API and the sandbox tool it provides. I also work in the data center space on a daily basis, so it kind of made sense for me to experiment with some of that stuff. As I get further into studying the enterprise automation topics and programmability in general, I will put out more in-depth content on how all of this works in terms of APIs, REST APIs, Python, Postman, and the enterprise side of things. The main goal of this video is to quickly show network programmability in action, explain how exactly I came up with the script, and hopefully help other people who are totally confused by network programmability see its potential, give you some resources to get started, and dispel some fears. So without further ado, let's go. All right, so here we are on the box, and I just want to show you quickly that our interface is in a default state with no configuration to it. Now, let's pull up our script. What I have here is PyCharm. It's really cool because it has an interpreter built in. You can run scripts within the IDE itself. Tons of options out there for that. I'll let you do your own research. Before we get too much into what the script actually is, let's just run it. Oh, and actually there's a part in here that I want to take out because it's for the end of the video. So let's run it. And it looks like it completed successfully. So let's go back to our box. And if we show run one again, whoa, we have some config. So what happened again? So as I mentioned, we did no switch port. We gave an IP. We enabled OSPF on the interface in area 0, and we turned it up. This is a named instance of OSPF. I named it API config because I thought that was funny. It's not named that because it was configured with the API or anything like that. You can name it whatever you want or use a number as a traditional process ID. So how did I come up with it, right? Or how does the script work? Let's look at the script. First thing you need to do in any kind of network programmability, as far as the Cisco stuff is to authenticate, and really with a lot of APIs, this is how it works. Same as when you want to configure the box, you got to log in, right? So you'll have an endpoint, or this right here is just the IP of the device. It might be the DNAC, or it might just be, in this case, an individual device with an API enabled. Then you'll have an endpoint. I got this information straight from the documentation of the API because REST APIs are well documented and they have lists of all these different endpoints and how you can interact with them and what kind of information you can send and receive. So I looked at the documentation because I went through some stuff and I said, okay, I got to authenticate, I got to get a token. This is the endpoint for that. And then they give you the code, and you just need to replace your username and password. I have a basic, same as the sandbox here. And what we're using here is the requests library from Python. Now, let me go off on a tangent real quick and say, I'll break the news here. Yes, you do need to learn some basic Python. You don't need to be a master. You don't need to be a software engineer. Just find a free course either from YouTube or Solo Learn or there, Code Academy, whatever. If you have Udemy, if you have wherever you want to go, there's tons of free or paid options out there. But just go through a basics course. I don't think there's really any other way to get a hang on some of this stuff without knowing the fundamentals of Python. That being said, I'm so far from probably even being an intermediate Python person, it's not even funny. I definitely didn't write all of this code by hand. I'll get into how I generated it in a few minutes here, but I did come up with some parts of it, and I needed some basic knowledge to know how to do that. So yes, you do need to go through a basic Python course. Going through some of my stuff that's coming in the future, you will need basic Python knowledge. And given that I'm not a Python master and there's already so much of it out there, I don't plan on doing any Python specific tutorials at the moment. So learn Python. It's going to earn you money in your career and it's inevitable for the future. You can run if you want, but it's my opinion that you're going to need it in the future. So you might as well just bite the bullet and do it now. Okay. Now that I'm off that tangent, again, we're using the request library from Python and we're posting to this URL with this payload, right? Now, when you do that, it's going to return you a token. And it's also going to return you a cookie, which is going to have the same value as that token. So I looked at the requests library, and there's a method for you to grab the value of a cookie that's returned. The cookie they give you is called APIC cookie, and this is storing the value of the token. So what I did is create a variable token and then grab the value of the APIC cookie and store it in that variable token because I know I'm going to need it later to configure the box. Hey, let me in. Here's my ID. Oh, boom. Okay, come on in. Moving on to the next part. If you'll look, the endpoint is a little bit different. Instead of AAA login.json, it's API or mo/sys.json. And if you look at this payload right here, this is mega long. I did not write this. I used the sandbox to generate this, and I'll show you that. We can do that right now actually. So if we pull that down, basically looking at our script, these are the commands that I knew I needed to run to accomplish this simple thing of doing OSPF on one interface. If you don't know Nexus, don't worry about it. That's not the point of the video. Some of that might have looked weird, like feature OSPF and all of that, but don't worry about that. As you see here in the sandbox, right, I need to change this here to be the REST API. And then we use this here to get the DN. So the DN is kind of that endpoint there, that last part of the URL. So we'll convert with DN, and you see it gives us that endpoint right there. So it lets you know that that's the endpoint. And then it also generates all of this for us. So what we can do is take this and either, this will generate, the sandbox will generate Python for you too, but what I use is a tool called Postman. So I just took this, right? And then I'll come into Postman. And if we look at the instance here where we've got our box URL IP, and then we have our endpoint here, And Postman basically gives you all these different options in the body of your request. And we're using a post method because we're trying to put something, we're not getting information from the box, we're trying to write something to the box. So we're posting to it. Um, we go to the body and we just paste in all of that payload that we got from the sandbox. The way Postman works, right? It inherits the token, it inherits the authentication from the parent. So all of these behind this initial one are gonna inherit the token from here. And this will make sense in a second when I show you how Postman generates the code. So first thing I did was just get that URL from the documentation and the payload to authenticate. Let's send that through and see what happens. Remember these status codes I told you about. You can look up HTTP status codes and um, see what all the different ones are. You've seen 404 before, page not found, I'm sure. So this one came back okay because everything was formatted correctly, pointed to a good endpoint. And as I mentioned in the body of the response, we see our token here. It's this long value. And if we look at the cookies, we see this APIC cookie, and then you see HTN, HTN. Um, so it's the same value, right? It's the same value. So that's how I knew how I could grab that from here. If you look at, I need to minimize this a second so you can see it here. If you click this button right here in Postman, it's going to give you the code, and you could just copy that right into your API. I mean, sorry, your IDE. But if you'll notice here, it's hard coding the cookie in here, like I told you, or the token. It's when you send the request, you have headers, and in your headers that you're sending, you have a cookie, and then you store the token. This is no good because, like I said, they expire. So in the case of the initial authentication, because that's the whole point of it, is to get the token. I took that part out, and we can see that basically this is what I have pasted in here. The only thing I did was change. If you look at Postman, it says just URL payload headers. I changed them to have, which section before them, because I knew I was going to have multiple parts to the script and I didn't want to reuse the same variables over and over again. So I changed those. And then also you have to change them here. So from, URL payload headers, then URL headers equal headers, data equals payload. We change it to basically to match. Headers equal authenticate headers, data equals authenticate payload. And then this is where I grab that value of the cookie. So I mentioned this before, but I'll just go over it again real quick. We create a variable token and we set it equal to the value of APIC cookie. This comes in handy because let's go back to Postman, right? In that second part, I told you we got this from the sandbox. Sandbox told us that this is the endpoint we need to make those configurations, and it gave us the payload that we need to run those commands, which we see here. So we paste all of that into the body of the post request. And then, if we send this, it'll come back okay, but I'll click code. Whoa, blah, blah, blah. I told you I didn't write that by hand. But if you look here again, we have that cookie hard coded in. Let's say you wanted to configure OSPF on E11 of a bunch of different boxes, right? All you would need to do is change the IP address within the script. Um, I don't want to get on too many tangents, but you could even set this section of the part to a variable, right? And I mean, you could even have the script ask you like, what IP do you want? And then it would replace it for you. So you could get show runs from all your boxes, what IP, okay, well, what IP, oh, and anyway, um, this is where the replacement of that cookie came in. Sorry, I'm kind of going over, going all around here. I hope you guys are staying with me, but I knew I needed to replace that hard-coded cookie because it's not going to be good forever. It's not going to be good every time I want to run the script. I want the script to work every time I run it. So what I did was I took this headers section here. If you look at the headers, I noticed that you have apic cookie equals, and then you have the value of the cookie that you get from the parent originally. So all I did in my script, and this is where the basic knowledge of Python did come in. This is where I did have to use my rudimentary knowledge of Python to think, okay, well, how can I accomplish that? So I set what this is a dictionary. If you know Python, you'll know that this is a dictionary, and dictionaries are made up of sets of key value pairs. This is a key. It's separated by a colon, and it has a value. So I have a key here, cookie, and I have set the value to be empty. And um, basically, I've used Python to say the value of this cookie key should be this string plus the value that I have stored in the variable token. So essentially, what I've done is we have our authentication section, and it gives us a token in part of its response, and then we store that the value of that token in the variable called token here, and then we replace this with whatever's generated from that first section in the Python code. And that's basically how this script works. That's how I use these three tools together to come up with that. And that is basically what we have. So here is the documentation for the NX API. I'll just go through one more example before we close the video out. Let's say that we wanted to get the show run of that interface after we configure it all. If we look at the documentation here, it tells us that we see here's your IP. This is your endpoint that you need to send a the post request to. Request.post. So we'll take that, and I think I already have this set up. I do. So here's the URL. I mean the IP of the box, and then we've set that to our endpoint, right? This shows us right here a payload we could use. We could just copy this, but this is for show IP interface brief VRF all. I don't necessarily want VRF all. What if I just want the E11? Well, you could just change that to what you want right there, or you could use the sandbox here, show run interface E11. Actually, we need to change to the CI. So again, this gives us our payload right here. And we need to change this format to JSON. There we go. It was in a different format before. You probably can't see that because of where I have my video, but you just need to change the message format to JSON and you get your JSON. So then we can see that's obviously the same because I configured it beforehand. And if we send this, we'll see if this is still good from the first time I authenticated in Postman. The token may have expired. We might get to see a different code than OK, but I think it wasn't too long ago, so probably get the answer back. The show runs seem to take a bit of time to complete for whatever reason. So we're waiting. And this is another way that I used Postman was to test. Before I added it into my actual script, I used Postman to visually test. And we see that this is all good. This is a good endpoint. This is a good payload because we got the 200 OK code. And here's the value of our response. So we can see here that this is a CLI show. It's Ethernet 1.1. Here's our IP. We're in router OSPF, the named instance in area 0, and we have no shutdown, no switch ports. So not very human readable, but very machine readable, very scalable. Imagine that you had, a set of commands that you run all the time, on your boxes, you could just set the script up and, run it all in one click. Um, you could also have, scripts analyze parts of your config. You can have them doing things like, maybe backups or something like that. Yeah, you could do that with event scheduler or embedded event manager or something like that, but you could also do it with this. You could have your TFTP scripted, whatever, but this is just another way to do it. And I think that the key things here are scalability, machine consumable, um, less error prone. Um, there's really a lot of benefits to it, and I really think it's the future of the industry. I think network engineers and network professionals who uh, are resisting all of this will, be relegated to the help desk or something. But that's probably 15, 20 years or so from now, maybe sooner, maybe later. Will Joe's Bait Shop ever have an APIC or a DNA center? Mm, who knows, but I think the biggest companies have already adopted and are adopting this technology, and I think it'll trickle down, through the enterprises as time goes on. So I hope this video has been informative. I hope it wasn't kind of too round robin all over the place for you, but I just wanted to show how I used the tools that are out there to come up with something and accomplish something with programmability, because the Cisco stuff is so well documented, and there's just so much of it. They have so many products, and sometimes it's hard to know or hard to find where to get started. Or it's like you follow one of the DevNet tutorials or whatever, and you're like, okay, cool, I did it in the sandbox, but what about, what if I want to do this, or what if I want to do that? So I hope I've given you some ideas. I hope this made sense. If you're not subscribed already, make sure you subscribe, because I'll have more in-depth content coming out as I go further on the enterprise side. And you can also go to the website, agray.tech. I've got some packet tracer labs on there. I've got more labs in the work that I'm coming out with, and just a lot more cool stuff coming soon. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next series.